Good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Fotis from the Skillman Foundation and a leader of ComNet Detroit. ComNet Detroit is a local chapter of Communications Network National. Communications National is a professional network of foundation and nonprofit leaders devoted to connecting top professionals and the best ideas in communications for good. The local chapter here, we have a monthly that goes on the second Friday of every month. Usually we meet in person, but with the given circumstances, we've been meeting remotely. So we'll be having our remote meetings posted online on our Facebook group, which is Communications Network Detroit. And we'll also be sharing them on our e-newsletter. So stay tuned for more information. Myself, and then there's 3 other Communications Network Detroit folks that I want to give a shout out to. Krista Yankee from Kresge Foundation, Jack Nink from 3 Spot, and Emily Engelhardt from Fair Food Network. And thanks to everyone joining us on the call today. I wanted to say that the speakers that are joining us, I am really honored that they are taking the time to share their insights with us. They have years of experience in this. Ron Fournier is the president of Truscott Rossman, which is a national PR firm that has 3 offices here in Michigan, Lansing, Detroit, and Grand Rapids. Truscott Rossman helps their clients shape stories in a way that really drives change. I've seen them do it for us at the Skillman Foundation. They've just been such a great partner, and Ron is so insightful. So I'm really, Ron, thank you so much for joining us. And then we have Chris Perry, who's the Chief Development and Marketing Officer for United Way of Southeastern Michigan. For those in Michigan, you're aware of United Way's efforts. They've pulled together a COVID community response fund. It's a multi-million-dollar fund that's helping children and families throughout the region, as well as the nonprofits that serve them. So Chris will tell us a bit of background on that. But further back in Chris's career, he began his career in market research. He worked for advertising agencies and then transferred to, I believe it was a 25-year career in the automotive industry, where he worked for Isuzu, Hyundai Motors, and finally General Motors, where he served as vice president of marketing for Chevrolet. So Chris has a wealth of knowledge in marketing and in PR. So Chris will be sharing some insights of how crisis communications has really come into play when we're talking about the COVID-19 scenario, and knowing not only what to do for your organization, but what to do for your community. Nonprofits on the line, I know I can speak for the funders and the consultants on the phone when I say thank you so much for your work. I know it's a extremely difficult time, and I hope that this conversation will be of help to you. We'll be recording the conversation, so it will be made available online on our Facebook page, ComNetwork Detroit, after the conversation. So to kick it off, we'll start with an overview of best practices for crisis communications, shared by our seasoned journalist, newsroom leader, and PR pro, Ron Fournier. I don't think I had mentioned before joining Truscott, Ron led Crane's Detroit Business as the editor and publisher, and he was also, he's a seasoned journalist. He has served as, he covered the White House and national politics for the Associated Press during the Clinton, Bush, and Barack Obama administrations. He's a former journalist for The Atlantic and editor-in-chief for the National Journal and Washington bureau chief of the Associated Press. So Ron, I'm gonna kick it over to you to share some example, or to share the best practices for us.
Well, thank you, Natalie. Good morning, everybody. I feel a little bit Out of my depth here, especially with somebody with the skills and the background of Natalie and Chris on the panel. They've been doing this a lot longer than I have. I've only been in public relations now for 2 years. But I do think that I've brought some experience from the journalist world that is really playing dividends for my clients, and hopefully some of what we talk about here today will translate for you. Let's start with what I learned on the beat and what's translated for me. What we have up here, this is a tweet from Rick Wilson, an old source of mine, a Republican source of mine, who's now into consulting, and that's kind of his tongue-in-cheek rules for crisis management, which I'll walk through in a minute. But I like the one about the lawyers. Let's just go back to the beginning here a little bit. Like Natalie said, I had a pretty remarkable, lucky run coming out of Detroit, where I grew up, and then making my way to Washington. I covered the Monica Lewinsky scandal. I was in the room when Bill Clinton wagged his finger and said he did not have sex with that woman. For the 2000 recount, I led the coverage for the AP and was actually a very, very minor figure in the movie that was made of it. 9/11, I was the last civilian in the White House by about 90 minutes. The place had been evacuated, and the Secret Service was trying to get me out so they could leave, but I had to keep filing. And then I was bureau chief for the AP when Barack Obama was elected president, and I had the honor of being the guy who pushed the button on the flash that announced that we had the first African-American president in our country. Being a reporter and a journalist at times like that, I learned something that really has translated, and that is the importance of being the calmest person in the room. And if I've learned anything the last 2 years working for clients around the country, is always be the calmest person in the room. If nothing else externally, be the woman, be the man who at least appears to have their act together, and at least appears to be seeing the broad landscape, and at least appears to have been through a crisis or two. If you're able to, also be the calmest person internally. And I compare this, when it's really going well, I compare it to an athlete who will talk about how the game slowed down for them at the Super Bowl, or when they got in a really hot shooting streak in basketball, or the puck was finding the net in basketball. These great athletes talk about how the game slowed down for them. For everyone else, it was going really fast, but for them, it slowed down. They could see where the puck was going and skate towards it. That's where you want to be as a communications professional, certainly where I wanted to be as a journalist. And when I'm doing my best for my clients, I'm that calm presence, both externally and internally. So let's talk about this first slide here that we popped up with my old friend, Rick. So he does this kind of tongue in cheek, but there's something to it. I'll never forget when I first walked into the downtown offices of one of the big families here in Detroit. I'm not going to say who they are. They were a client, but one of the big three families. And the head lawyer walked up and introduced himself to me as the communications director. And at first I thought he was teasing, but then I realized he wasn't. And I immediately understood why this family was having such a hard time with their public relations. You've got to be able to work well with the legal team. Any crisis, just about any crisis that your nonprofit or a client that you might be working with, the real big ones almost always have a legal component. Certainly COVID does. So you can't do anything that's going to undermine the legal case. But you know what? The lawyers can't do something that undermines the public relations case, because it's no good to win the battle in the court if you lose it in the court of public opinion. So when this is done really well, the lawyers have a say, the PR people have a say. Maybe they bring a joint recommendation after fighting it out to the executive director of the CEO, or maybe there's somebody inside the institution who listens to the lawyers, listens to the PR people, and comes up with the best third approach. Tell the truth, tell it all, tell it fast. Mike McCurry, who was one of the great White House press secretaries of our generation, talked about during the Lewinsky scandal, tell the truth slowly. He said that kind of tongue in cheek. But the fact is they actually told it quickly. The Clinton people were brilliant in that scandal. They were the ones who uncovered most of the negative stuff that was going to come out about Clinton. For example, they were the ones that found out about the blue dress, they being Bill Clinton's team. before Starr did. And I'll let you on a little secret, having been there, it was the White House that leaked that dress to the media. The fact that his DNA was unaddressed, because they knew it was going to come out, so they wanted to control the story. So they leaked it out to the reporter who would give them a fair treatment at a cycle that most benefited them at a time where they were ready to then attack the story and accuse the Republicans of leaking it. So tell the truth, get the truth, be a good reporter, find out the details and get it all out there as quickly as you can on your terms. And then again, don't let the lawyers run a PR crisis. Describe a fix and do it. This is really important. If you're in a crisis, you're almost always in a situation where something is effed up. And you've got to show people that you have a way out of it and you're going to fix it. So yes, don't let the lawyers run the crisis. Tell the truth and tell it fast. Get to the details, understand what the truth is, get it out there, but then be helping your organization think through, your executive director think through, what could a solution to be to this problem? How can I make our institution, my boss, a hero of this story or a reformer of this issue? Want to go to the next slide? So there's a couple acronyms that we use at TR. One has been around Truscott Rossman for several years, B and OAF. Own it, apologize for it, and fix it. It reflects back to Rick's slide there. This is a pretty basic but pretty powerful 3 steps. When you look at, let's say, like the MSU scandal, when John Engler was right in the thick of it. If he had come out right away and said, this is my responsibility. I wasn't here when it happened, but I'm the guy who's going to have to fix it. This is my responsibility, and I am sorry for every victim of this man's evil doings, including victims that we haven't uncovered yet. I apologize on behalf of this institution. And here are the 7 steps I'm going to do to make sure this never happens again. If John Engler had done that from the beginning, if he had been an oaf, if he had owned it, if he had apologized for it, if he had offered fixes for it, MSU would be in a lot better state right now. I'll go to the next slide. Well, this is another way of looking at the same thing. It's actually the one that before I heard of OAF at Truscott Rossman, the first client I had, I start talking about lending an ear. Will you please show some empathy, sir? Would you please take ownership of it? And let's talk about how you're going to fix it. Let's talk about how you're going to reform it. So, there's a few other kind of basic rules of thumb, stuff that I saw people I was covering not do, and stuff that now my best clients, my most successful clients do. One is the old acronym, keep it simple, stupid. You can do all the things we're talking about now, but if you don't have your messaging very simple and very clear, they're not going to hear. Your audience is not going to hear that you're going to reform. Your audience is not going to hear that you're really sincere about apologizing. You don't want it to be that husband apology. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. You want it to be a clear apology. I'm sorry, period. What else? Oh, important one. Be honest about what you know and what you don't know. So, boil that right down. Don't ever lie. People like me, we'll find it out. And then we'll really stick it to you, because there's nothing reporters hate more than being lied to. There's nothing the public hates more than being lied to. But also don't, what gets most people in trouble isn't the purposeful lie, it's the unintentional lie. It's being asked a question that you don't know the answer to and feeling like you got to show how smart you are, so you're going to make it up. So don't be afraid to tell a reporter, don't be afraid to tell an editor that you don't know the answer. You'll get back to them. The best defense is offense. Look, it's natural to get in a crouched position when the world is crashing in on you, when you've got employees who are sick, when those employees who are sick got some of your customers sick. It's really easy to get in a crouch position. That's how you get your butt kicked in. You gotta get up, you gotta hold your head high. In a crisis, don't forget how powerful your mission is, how much you respect your leader. Don't forget why you got in this nonprofit. Be proud of your mission, even as it's under assault. And find a way to be offensive. Find a way to push out the positive story. And that would be the last rule of thumb. I got this from Rahm Emanuel, who was Barack Obama's chief of staff, a congressman and former mayor of Chicago. He said during the height of the 2008 economic collapse, never let a good crisis go to waste. And what he meant by that is when the world is crashing in around you, when the economy is collapsing, when you're in the middle of an epidemic, when your fundraising is drying up, when people are starting to question your value in the nonprofit marketplace, this is an opportunity. This is the chance to take that spotlight that is on you now and pivot to tell your positive story, to claim your story, to change the narrative. Don't let a good crisis go to waste. I know a lot of my clients right now are having some of the best PR they've had in months. And I'm seeing them do things I didn't think they were capable of doing. They're now responding and acting in a, they're rising to the occasion in the public square. They're not letting a crisis go to waste. So Neil, I think that's about all I can share. I know Chris can really build on that. Matter of fact, I got my pen and my reporter's notebook. I'm going to take some notes.
Oh boy.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. And I forgot to mention at the top, if you have questions, please type them into the chat box and we'll be answering them after we hear from both Ron and Chris. I'll kick off the question and answer section and then we'll go to others. Chris, we heard a lot of great advice from Ron. I'm wondering if you could tell us an overview of the COVID-19 response from United Way for Southeastern Michigan, what you considered as you were putting it together and what it really took from a communications front.
Sure, and of course, thank you for having me on this webinar, and thank you for those of you who are joining us. I think the difference between what we did and maybe what's presented here is crisis communications. We didn't see this as a crisis that we created. It was a crisis that we needed to step into the breach to address. This was kind of perfectly set for our mission, and we kind of jumped into it recognizing that this is the role that we need to play in the community. So, and I'll tell you the reason why behind that is we did a research study last year. It was called ALICE. It stands for ALICE, Asset Limited Income Constrained Employee. I'm sure some of you have heard that before. The governor referenced that many times in her speeches. We understood that 44% of the households in Southeast Michigan, the communities we serve in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County, were struggling to meet their basic needs. So that means housing, utility, healthcare, what have you. And then there's obviously in certain pockets, it's much greater than that. In Detroit, the ALICE level is 74%, Pontiac is 72%. So I think we understood pretty quickly that this coronavirus is going to have a significant impact in those in our community who were vulnerable and recognize how fragile the community was. So I want to say, looking back at my timeline, mid-March, we recognized the need for us to step in. So first and foremost, we talked to our board and said, this is what we need to step into. This is where we need to play a role. And they thankfully approved a disbursement of $2 million from our emergency relief fund that we have here at United Way. And we thought that was important because we wanted to go out to the community and let them know that we were stepping in. We were putting, seeding this with our own investment and kind of putting, our dollars against this issue as well. And then we started to realize, okay, and then who's our constituents that we need to continue to communicate with? And as you can imagine, there's quite a few of them. So we're looking at board and subcommittees of our board, our campaign cabinet that helps us raise money, our affinity groups, individual donors, elected officials, labor partners, on and on and on, and actually created a spreadsheet of all the different constituents and started crafting a plan of how we're going to communicate them. And we bucketed into, I would say, generally three different areas. It's cultivation, activation, and solicitation. So cultivation is just what are we trying to do here, and let people know what our plans are. And activation being where we need them to step in and help us. And then solicitation is really asking for funding. So when we started this process, once we got funding from the board, then we reached out pretty quickly to who we knew in their community would be willing to step up. So key corporate partners, key foundation partners, invited them to participate in the webinar. And that webinar was really meant to do a couple of things. And one is just let them know what we see as the challenges in the community, how we feel that we can step in and help address those challenges. Ask them what they felt their challenges, what they're seeing in the community that we might maybe not seeing, and then ask them to participate, ask them to help fund this initiative that we wanted to launch. And we got quite a bit of positive response from the beginning, and we've continued to do that throughout the last couple of weeks. Then we reached out to our agency partners, those on the front lines, because we knew that this fund had to not only help those in the community that were most vulnerable, but also serve those agencies that were serving those most vulnerable. We've seen a lot in the press around these, a lot of the nonprofits are struggling to fundraise right now. They maybe had some events or activities planned during the spring that was maybe their main fundraiser. They're going to be struggling to keep their doors open. We knew it was really important for us to be the backbone of that nonprofit sector and make sure that those agencies have the funds to stay propped up. So we, like I said, started a fundraise, a webinar with them, letting them know what our plans are, how we want to support them, and put on our website an opportunity for them to apply for a grant. Very simple, straightforward, and starting to get funds out to them in what we call operational grants so they can continue to do what they need to do. From there, then we started to talk to our other constituents and let them know what we're doing. And again, it was just an ongoing cadence of information, and a lot of it having to focusing and driving people to our website. You have a screen up here about the different sources we had on our website. So find resources. That was really meant to be an opportunity for people in the community to understand where they can go to get the resources that they need, whether that's for housing or food or utility assistance, or a lot of families had their kids still at home, so their education resources. I mean, that's one of the areas that we're known for, is our providing resources, and particularly through our 211 call center. Excuse me. I'm sure a lot of people on the line recognize our 211 call center. It's a national network that, just like 911 or 411, people who need to get information on social services call 211. So we maintain that network for the 5 counties in Southeast Michigan. And it's just people calling in, trying to find information how they can get help. So that was just putting that information on our website was just an extension of what we've already been doing. I already talked about requesting funds, made it very simple for agencies to put in grant applications so we can quickly turn those around and get the money out to the funder, to these agencies. Obviously, we had an opportunity for people to come in and donate to us. One of the things that was key is also volunteering. We recognize that we try to put resources out in the community, not just monetary resources, but human resources, and work with our agency partners to identify what volunteer opportunities they needed, and then try to connect them to those on our portal who would be willing to go out and volunteer. And then our impact, make sure that we keep stories out about the impact we're having. So it's not just about transferring the funds from donors to agencies, but also making sure the community at large and all of our different constituents that I talked about earlier understand the work that we're doing, the impact that we're having. So I think that's an overview of how we rolled this out. Right now, we are at we've raised about $8 million, and we've allocated funds to about 120 agencies in Southeastern Michigan. And that's about 120 nonprofit agencies and about 75 child care education agencies. So really trying to turn that money around really quickly to get it out to the community.
That's great. Chris, thank you so much for that overview and for the work you're doing at United Way. I'm wondering if you can think back to the insights that Ron shared and let us know what practices that you found really carried over when your aim of crisis communication is to protect not only your organization, but the community. So maybe what carried over and what else do you need to consider?
One of Ron's slides said, tell the truth, I'll tell it first. And that's one of the things we tried to be brutally honest with people, just saying, here's the challenges that we're facing, that we see that's happening in the community. And being open to them and saying, what are we missing? What are the challenges that you're seeing that we haven't identified, and how can we partner together to address those issues? And being very transparent with everybody we spoke to, quite honestly, and making sure they understood that we don't have all the answers, and we need everyone to lock arms to make sure that we can be successful in these efforts together. That's probably that's probably the main one. I think, like I said, this was an area that we were pretty, I don't want to say comfortable in, but this is what we do. Our mission is around making sure that we help to stabilize households in Southeast Michigan. And I think we're kind of uniquely set up to step into that breach and help the community.
Ron, I know that you, with Truscott Rossman, have supported organizations during the COVID crisis. Are there any examples that you could share?
Not by naming the client by name for obvious reasons, but yeah, there's in particular a major corporation in Detroit whose service is essential. And is public facing, and they woke up one day a couple weeks ago and realized that not only did they have a couple people who were diagnosed with it, but one of those people had come in contact with members of the public, and they were really and totally understandable, really in a panic. The comms team was really freaked out, wasn't sure what to do, if anything. Their leadership wasn't giving them much direction. And their first instinct, as I think it would be for anybody, was to keep it quiet, to hope it went away, and maybe have a holding statement ready in case the media came to them. My first instinct was to know that you can't keep something like that secret, not for long, it'll get out. Also, the pandemic was such a big story that it was touching everybody, that the public would forgive an organization for having people sick. By at that time, even 2 weeks ago, we all knew people, or new institutions, new companies, our own families were being stricken with it. So it wasn't, you wouldn't be out there out on an island if you told the truth quickly. And if you use that opportunity to tell the people who you're informing about this tragedy in your workplace, about everything you've done to protect your employees and to protect the community, and to put together a release that leads with the story, because everything comes down to the other thing you learn in journalism. Everything comes down to the story. What is the protagonist? What is the setting? What is the conflict, the plot? And what is the resolution? And we forget about that in newsrooms, and we forget about it in PR companies, that this isn't about a press release or an article or a pitch, it's about the story. Well, in this case, the story was a community struggling with the beginning of this epidemic, and how the people in this company were helping the community. And as part of that story, a proof point was that some of the employees were sick. So we were honest with the public, but we told a broader story that was more reflective of, yes, it was spin, it was the positive piece of it, but it was reflective of what the company was doing. So we told the truth quickly, we told a good story, we didn't hold anything back, and we quickly got around the lawyers who were afraid of, if you tell people too much, they might sue. That's going to be a problem one way or another. We might as well get our story out.
Thank you for that. This is a question for both of you. What role does an organization's brand and values play into your crisis communications response?
I'll take it real quickly. A brand is a fancy word for a story. It's the story you're telling about your organization. In that story, you are the hero. The conflict is achieving your mission. The setting is this great, gritty, troubled city, and the resolution is, in most of the cases, the people on this phone is helping folks navigate the crisis. Actually, the hero of your stories are the people you're serving, and the conflict is a tough life they're going through, and the resolution are the services that you're helping them provide. If that's your brand, then when you're in the middle of a crisis, you rush to that brand, you rush to that story. That's your story. That's the story that one way or another you're going to try to get out there. So your brand is everything. but your brand isn't just a slogan. Your brand isn't something that you paid some firm $100,000 to come up with. Your brand isn't what you put at the bottom of your letterhead. Your brand is your story. Never forget your story.
Chris, would you like to share something on that as well?
You know, my power just got back in. Talk about a crisis. Right.
We can hear you now.
Okay. Boy, I apologize for that.
No problem. So the question was, how does your organization's brand and values play into your crisis communication responses?
I mean, you know, our mission is to mobilize the caring power of Southeast Michigan to help those people in need. So this crisis that came about right now was, like I said earlier, is really aligns with our overall mission as an organization. So we were just acting out on the mission that's established for us. Like I said, reaching out to those corporate partners and foundations and donors to help us meet the needs of the community, making sure we lock arms with other agency partners to help them make sure they're able to serve those in their community. And the communication was a reflection of that, and making sure we're just true to our brand and our mission. Thank
you. There's a question from Daniela, who asks, if an organization's mission is not an emergency need right now during the COVID crisis, if it's not related to health or another emergency need, should that organization be communicating now, or should they hold back? Ron, it looks like you've got a definite feeling about this.
I'll just boil it down and Chris can build on it. You have to be visible while everyone else is invisible. This is a story that everyone is interested in and is focused on. Find your way into it.
Yeah, I would agree with Ron. I think that the nonprofits are really going to survive on the relationships we have with their different constituents, and so to continue to communicate with them is going to be key. Your mission might not align with what's in need right now, but you know, first and foremost, you want to maintain that relationship. So just reaching out to see how people are doing. You know, our donor relations team and our corporate relations team, when first and foremost, when we had them reach out to our donors and funders, was just to find out how people are doing. You know, how's this impacting you and your family? Are you doing okay, and so forth. That's key to that, building that relationship that you want to maintain when this eventually subsides.
Plus, Natalie, if I could, I'll buy anybody who's watching lunch if they can tell me what their mission is, and I can't connect it to this crisis. We are being hit in a way socially, you know, as a people, in a way that we haven't in 102 years. And it's hitting us where we work, where we live, how we learn, how we communicate. There's not a facet of our lives that isn't being hit by this pandemic. So there's got to be a way to connect your mission, your story, to this crisis.
This is kind of the other side of the coin, I think, and it comes from Chris Tull. He asks, for a nonprofit that's stepping in to help in the current crisis, what should they, you know, watch out for? How can they be a good partner to others and not add, he says, to the problem?
Chris?
I would say, and it goes back to what Ron said at the very beginning, tell truth, be authentic, you know, make sure that your efforts are there to help those in need, and not self-serving, because people recognize that pretty quickly.
Right, if your mission is to help people, we all need help now. There's got to be a way you can help us. So help us, and then people like me can help tell that story.
Yeah.
So crisis communications, I think some people think about it as this external strategy, but it is very much just about as having your internal communications sharp and on point. Yep. So maybe breaking it down into two different levels. What do you need to do to engage your leadership to have them on the same page? And then what should you be doing to make sure that your whole organization is appropriately up to speed?
Well, I'll tell you from our perspective, we use Microsoft Teams where I'm on that, gosh, 12 hours a day probably. And we're starting from the very beginning, we were having a morning call and an afternoon call with our leadership team because things were changing so quickly, just to bring everyone up to speed. And it might have been a half-hour check-in just to say, okay, what happened yesterday? And what do we need to do today? And making sure everyone's up to speed. And that was, like I said, the leaders in our organization. Then we would have separate meetings with teams. Each of the leaders would lead that team, communicate out what's happening, where they need to step in. And then, like I said, we circled back in the afternoon. And it was constant communication. And then, of course, if those of you who use Teams, there's file folders that, all the information that we have is in that is accessible to others in the organization, so they know what the latest information is. So if they need to share anything out to their teams or externally, they can. And then it's arming making sure that we arm our leaders with information that they can then transfer to their staff. We have about 150 people in our organization, so to keeping everybody up to speed, it requires a lot of diligence and discipline for all the leaders to make sure we communicate. And then also, emails to staff. Our CEO, Dr. Hudson, did a video that she shared with our staff, because it is key, like you said, to making sure everyone understands what we're doing, the success we're having, the challenges that we're facing, and how we can all pull together to meet those challenges.
I'll just share a little bit of what we're doing internally. That's been interesting, and I think we've learned from it, and we'll carry this out of the pandemic. One is just the tactics, kind of the stuff Chris mentioned. We right away went from having quarterly meetings with our staff. We have about 25, 30 people spread across 4 offices, to twice weekly meetings. And we've made them, we went from our meetings being very structured to be very unstructured, allowing for conversation, allowing people to express anxieties, criticisms, concerns, joint problem solving. And our leadership meeting, which is longer than it used to be, and it also has become less formalized and more of a conversation. We have regular welfare checks. John Truscott and I divide up the staff, and every day we make sure we touch base with everybody. How you doing? How you doing? Anything we can do for your family? How's grandma doing? Can we send over a meal? Just welfare check, and we do that very deliberately. The most important thing, though, was the tone that we set, or the message frame that we set from the beginning. I got really lucky, and knowing that I tend to be kind of a cup is half empty kind of guy, I right away think of the worst case scenario and plan towards it. And knowing that John, bless his heart, the owner of the firm and the CEO, he's a cup is half full kind of guy. He can spin his way out of anything and thinks everything's going to turn out well. Together, because of that, we're a pretty good partnership. But going into this, we pushed John more out in front of the staff than he's normally been. Normally, I'm more of the one who's leading staff, but we wanted, okay, John, we got to get the CEO out here. And we kept reminding each other 2 words: optimism, which John does that naturally, and to me, I got to dig deep, and realism. I do that naturally. For John, he's got to dig deep. So every time we get on a call for a welfare check, anytime we do a staff meeting, anytime we do our leadership team, John and I remind each other. We go optimism, realism, optimism, realism. Give them hope. Let them know that we're in this together. This firm's going to make it, and we're going to bring you all with us, and we're going to come out of this stronger and help our clients now and for the rest of our careers together. But these are pretty scary times. This is what we're going through. Here's our budget. Here's what we need out of you. Optimism, realism. And it was working pretty well. And then 2 nights ago, I'm reading the new Eric Larson book about Winston Churchill. And coincidentally, John's reading it as well. I'm a little bit ahead of him when I get to this passage during the Battle of Britain. And Larson writes about the 2 attributes that Churchill used to hold the country together: optimism and realism. And I think in a crisis like this, if you can find a balance between those 2 virtues, don't bullshit your people, but also don't be a Debbie Downer. Give them hope. Be looking around the corner to when things are going to be better. Those are not mutually exclusive, I'm finding out.
Crises come out of nowhere, and this isn't going to be the last time that we face one. What components can an organization prepare for? What can an organization have at the ready for a communications plan? And then how do you adapt those materials or content to a situation?
Well, I think, we developed it was a very simple communication plan from a crisis standpoint, just like, who do we need to get in the room? How do we connect with people? Kind of have a game plan set up, not because every crisis is a little bit different, but just recognizing who do we need to make sure that we're close to and who do we need to make sure that we connect with, government officials and others that we need to make sure that we have an open dialogue with. And that's something I'm sure Ron's firm helps with a lot of his clients, is having that on the shelf to be able to activate once something happens.
Yeah, we do, and something we pride ourselves on, including training people to activate it. But what we often forget, to be honest with you, Chris, and I have to keep reminding my team, is, again, I'm going to be broken record, but when the crap hits the fan and you pull that piece of paper off the shelf, it's really easy to run towards the tactics and forget about your story. Forget about your story. You forget about your brand. You forget about why you're in the business. Who is your hero? Who are you in business to help? What is their conflict? Not yours. What is their conflict? How are they going to get over that mountain? And what is the world going to look like for them? It's really easy to forget about like that in the panic. And if you forget about what your story is, you forget about your brand, you forget about your core values, the tactics aren't going to be any good.
We have a question from Lisa Grace. She's wondering how could a nonprofit that has flown under the radar and hadn't gotten much public attention use this moment when there's a lot of news coming out. There's just so much information, a lot of organizations coming into the picture to help community. How can you weigh both the opportunity to connect to your mission, but also the fact that there are, it's a competitive landscape to get news right now?
Don't make the story about your organization. Don't talk about your trouble raising money. Don't talk about how much money it is you're donating and what your CEO working really hard. And it's not about you. Find somebody, a human face, ideally a face that doesn't look like me, that looks like the rest of Detroit, a human face or two who you have impacted, whose life you have made better, and then inject that great story into this ecosystem. Reporters now are dying for good stories. One, because they know the readers want them, but the other thing because, believe it or not, guys, reporters are human beings. They want to write about something affirmational too. So find that story of somebody whose life your organization helped slightly, or better yet, somebody whose organization you helped help a bunch of other people, and then direct the story on those people. Maybe you get a mention in the story. It probably won't be in the lead, but if you get yourself in the nut graph of a great story like that, that's going to give you a better halo effect than somebody rewriting your press release about how great you are.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's a lot of, like Ron said, journalists are humans too, and they want to be able to tell those stories that are human interest stories, that are emotional. So bring the audience to the challenge that you're trying to address. Bring them to the problem that your organization is helping solve. Again, it's not about you, it's about the people that need the help and how you're helping them. And that will be the story that gets written.
Chris, when you were giving us an overview on the COVID-19 community fund, we saw the multiple audiences that you are reaching. How do you manage communicating different messages, but with the same umbrella tone to a variety of audiences, but using your same platform? So for example, on your Facebook, your Twitter, are you using the platforms to hit different audiences, or are you using all platforms with different messages for different audiences?
Well, that's a great question. I think right now, like you said, we have a core story that we're telling about how we're serving the community. but that story changes a little bit. Sometimes it's about the money we've raised. Sometimes it's about the money that we've allocated out. But going back to the previous question, we always try to turn it back to those people in need that we're trying to serve. It's really about those in our community that are struggling right now and how we can help them through this process. I think the way that we are keeping it is, like I said, it's very open conversation. Not only do I have those meetings twice a day with the leadership team, but my marketing team and communication team at least once a day, going through, okay, what is the story we're pushing out today and what are the channels we're using? And as you mentioned, we, between all of our social media channels, our public relations, emails out to specific constituents, we leverage all of them. And depending on who the audience is, it might be tweaked a little bit, but it goes back to the core story.
We're all communicators on the call, so we know that receiving and sharing accurate information is so important. And Ron, at the top of the call, you mentioned if you don't know something, tell the reporter that you'll get back to them. How can a communicator ensure that they have to what they believe is the most concrete information before they share it out?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, is it? I know as a reporter, I never knew that I had all the information, and I'm finding out as a PR professional, it's still a mystery. You do everything you possibly can. It's kind of, I know a lot of folks on this call are former reporters themselves. You have to continue to be a reporter and dig inside your organization for sources, people you can trust. Ask the hard question, ask it 3 or 4 times. Vet it with outside sources, vet it with people who you think have a perspective that you don't have and who don't have a bias. Once you've done all that, then you cross your fingers, close your eyes, and push the button. Hope it's right. Sound good, Chris?
Yeah, that's funny because I'm always the guy on the other end of those questions.
Yeah.
And I always try to go into a discussion with this, the 3 points I want to make sure that it's clear during the discussion with the journalist or whoever I'm talking to. And they might ask a question, and I do my best to try to get my answer back to the point that I want to make sure our fits with our story, I guess. And yeah, there's sometimes I can't tell you how many times I said to a reporter, "Boy, that's a good question. I'll have to get back to you." But I think that from my perspective, it just tells that I'm trying to be honest with them.
Yep.
I'm not trying to, I recognize that journalist has a job to do. We have a job to do. We want to get our story out, and they want to report on it. And my attitude and the way I was always trained is to be, certainly you want to put the best foot forward for your organization, but also help the journalists do their job.
I could tell you as a reporter, that did build faith and trust in the source when somebody would say, I'm not quite sure, let me get back to you on that. The worst thing you could do to me is lie. The second worst thing you could do to me is not return my call. Saying, I don't know, let me get back to you, that's way up high as one of the least of the problems. I mean, that's actually a sign of trust, just as long as you do get back to them. And you got to remember, Chris, you know this, Natalie, you know this, in our business, we're only as good as our reputations. This is all about relationships. And if you're not trusted, you're not going to have a good relationship, and you're not going to be able to serve your organization. So, you got to make sure you have it right. And if you're not sure, you tell the reporter you're not sure, or you don't give them the information.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about this, never let a crisis go to waste. I'll be honest with you, and you also mentioned returning your call. I mean, this is our opportunity from United Way standpoint, quite honestly, is to tell our story and the value that we bring to the community. So we are reaching out to the press, and we're open to everybody and anybody who wants to interview or talk about the work that we're doing. Our CEO, like I said, Dr. Hudson, is very much available, and I'll step in if necessary to also answer those calls. But
as a reader, I've heard more about United Way in the last 3 weeks than I have in the last 3 years.
Well,
you guys are rocking it.
Yeah, and well, like I said, we stepped into the breach pretty quick, and what's really satisfying is we're getting donations from organizations that we really had no relationship with. You hear the stories that you're hearing, and they're saying, okay, well, we want to help Detroit. United Way seems to be the leader in that space right now. So it's really gratifying for us to be able to get that recognition.
It has really been impressive how quickly United Way responded to the crisis. I'm wondering, is there a general rule of thumb for when a crisis arises, whether it's a potential hit to your organizational reputation, or it's something like a pandemic that everyone is reacting to? Is there a rule of thumb of like how quickly you need to prioritize your communications and your story in order to get ahead of things and really make a difference through your communications?
That's a great question. I mean, from our organization, first and foremost is that the people we serve. So let's make sure we have plans to address the needs of the community, and then quickly thereafter, as quickly as we can, or maybe even simultaneously, how do we get that message out? Because we have a lot of constituents that help us do that work, and we want to make sure they understand the role that we're playing in the community, and again, how they can help us. And then also to the press, make sure that they understand our role. But our first planning is always around how do we meet the needs of the community, and then it's about how do we communicate it out.
I'll tell you, as a consumer of this information, United Way is where it is now because it was out first. It was the first organization that jumped into the breach and said, we have a solution. We're pulling together this fund and we're going to help folks. Being first at the beginning of a wave, the beginning of a crisis, is really important. And I kind of remember my old days at the Associated Press. It's a slogan that goes back 170 years at the AP. First get it right, then get it first.
Yeah.
So again, make sure your information is right, but be first. We would rather be second than be wrong, but we never want to be second. United Way was first and it was right, and now it owns this pandemic. It's helping a lot of people, and it's helping its brand and helping its future because they were first and they were right. So these organizations that are wringing their hands and I'm going to review my plan, and my board's got to look at it, my attorney's got to look at it, and I've got to hire a new PR firm, and they're still wringing their hands and they're sucking wind. And they're not, and the shame of it is they're not helping as many people as they could if they had just threw themselves at the breach, told their story, which they should know how to tell anyhow, and start helping people right away.
So in order to be first out the gate, is there a set of questions that a communications lead should be working with their leadership on? So you can have the leadership think through things and get on the same page quickly. What are those core things to consider?
Frankly, if you don't know, if you're a nonprofit and you don't know how you can help people in a crisis when you're working in a city that has been in a crisis for 50 years, I can't help you. So my advice would be to do what you say you do and just do it faster and communicate quicker. Don't wring your hands and review everything. Do what you do it right away, help as many people as you can, and tell your story to as many people as you can. You are who you are. You don't have to reinvent it because there's a crisis. This is what you're built for. This is why you guys are here, is to help the city when we're facing a bigger crisis than we do in everyday life, which is a crisis. So help more people, help them quicker, tell your story a lot quicker to a lot more people. That's what Chris and his team have done.
Yeah, I mean, this one for us was pretty straightforward. Like I talked about, this is what we do. This is our mission. So deciding to step into this was was a pretty easy call. But I will tell you that from United Way standpoint, as you can imagine, we get brought into a lot of different discussions taking place in the community and how we can lean in, and we have to step back and say, okay, does this align with our mission? Does this align with our work? And do we want to, do we want to put something out in the community about what we're doing, or back a specific initiative, or not? Because sometimes it's not really our area, and we need to be recognized that there's areas that we don't need to be playing in. So we do have those conversations internally with our board quite often.
Although my guess is, Chris, you've been having those conversations since you've been there. And so therefore, they were really quick conversations when the shit hit the fan.
Yeah.
You guys knew what you were gonna do. You
Yeah.
had to talk about it real quick and dot some I's and cross some T's, but you knew what you were gonna do when you were facing something this big. You're doing what you've always done. You're just doing it on a bigger scale as an organization, and as a communicator, you're doing what you've always done. You're just doing it on a much bigger scale.
Yeah.
Agree?
Yeah.
It's all about your story.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I want to give an opportunity if you had any final thoughts before I round up the call with our basic information so people can find this recording and learn more. Ron or Chris?
I want to thank Chris and his organization for what they've done. I want to thank everybody on the phone call or webinar, whatever this is, for what your organizations are doing. The city's always been hurting. Now we're really, really hurting. We really need you, what your organizations are doing, and your organizations need you guys to get that story out so you can get the money in the coffers so you can help more people. So thank you for what you're doing for the city. And if I can help any of y'all, just please let me know.
I just say thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Ron, for joining us on this. And to all those on the call, just thank you. I mean, you're all out there doing the work you need to get done. There's a lot of conversations right now about United Way, and we feel flattered that the comments we're hearing, but we can't do the work that we're doing without partners of agencies like the people on the call. We all have to be in this together. We all have to lock arms to have the impact in the community that's necessary. There's a lot of people that are hurting and that are going to continue to, and this is a battle that we're going to be in for the next quite some time. So it's going to be an ongoing story, and we'll see how it unfolds.
Well, thanks to you both. I'm just popping up a screen here so folks can see how they can connect with Ron and Chris. Their Twitter handles are up there. And as mentioned, we're going to be posting this on our Facebook page so you can see a recording of today's webinar. It's ComNetworkDETROIT on Facebook. We also have a web page up there that you can follow and a hashtag. So thanks so much again to everyone on the call. I'm going to be taking the emails of the folks that have registered and adding you to our mailing list. If you are not from the Detroit area, you'll be on a separate list that will only receive invitations to our remote events. And to others in the Detroit area. Once we are able to convene in person again, we'll be doing these as networking and informational events. Thanks to everyone that joined us on the call today, and I hope you have a wonderful, safe, and healthy at-home weekend.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.